In this video, I want to talk about tentative maps, tentative subdivision maps, and I want to answer a key question, which is, should design professionals prepare a tentative map without the involvement of a land surveyor? And I should clarify right here at the beginning that, at least in California, as a general rule, design professionals, including civil engineers and architects, have the ability by law to prepare tentative maps. There's some gray area there. They got to be careful what information they show about existing boundaries, but they do have the ability to prepare tentative maps. At least that's my current understanding of the law. Now, just because something's legal doesn't mean it's a good idea. And so what I want to talk about in this video is, should design professionals do that? Should they prepare tentative maps without the involvement of a land surveyor? And if not, why not? And finally, the third question is, what parts of a tentative map should a surveyor prepare? So again, those three questions. Should a surveyor be involved in the preparation of a tentative map? Why? And what parts of a tentative map? Now, before we get to those three main questions, this video is really designed, it's primarily made for architects and civil engineers, but there may be other real estate professionals that are watching this video, or people new to the survey profession. So let me just answer two kind of background questions real quick. The first is, what is a tentative map? So when I say tentative map, what I'm talking about is the map that you prepare for a land subdivision. In California, it could be a parcel map or a subdivision map. The map that you prepare that is going to show the public agency that's going to approve your final subdivision what you have in mind. So how many lots, what configuration, what kind of improvements. Okay, so it's just a vehicle to get some feedback from the public agency on your proposed subdivision. After a tentative map gets approved by the agency, you're able to go in and do what's called a final map, so a final parcel map or a final subdivision map. Some people call them final tract maps, that allow you to actually create the lots that you want to create. So why do you need a tentative map? You need a tentative map because you want to subdivide land, at least in California. So as a general rule, there are exceptions, but as a general rule, if you want to do a land subdivision in California, you're going to need a tentative map. Okay, so should you prepare a tentative map without the involvement of a land surveyor? The answer is no. You should not do that. You can do it legally, but you shouldn't. And so then the question is, well, why not? So I have three reasons that I'm going to give you why you shouldn't do that. But before I do that, I'm going to try and tell you a story. I'm going to try and make it quick because I want these videos to be short. But I work for a large engineering and surveying company, and we were doing a subdivision map in the Bay Area. And the owner had bought 4, 5, or 6 parcels in this old block in a city. And there were a couple holdouts. So there were 3 holdouts, properties he wasn't able to negotiate a purchase with. So he started moving forward with the design process. He was going to put up, 8 stories of apartments, and with I think retail on the lower floor. So he was going to merge these lots. So we were doing a parcel map. That's how we were going to accomplish the merger. So I did a boundary survey, prepared a resolved boundary survey, did a little bit of topo, gave that to my civil engineer. We both worked for the same company at the time. And they were going to do their preliminary design work for the tentative map. Now, after I resolved the boundary, I was no longer involved in the project for a big chunk of time, because at this company, the civil engineers did their own tentative maps, which I think is a really bad idea. That's how this company worked. So after I resolved the boundary, I was taken out of the process. The civil engineering team worked on the tentative map. Now, after my involvement in the survey, the owner was able to negotiate the purchase of 2 of those holdout lots. So 2 of the 3 lots he was able to acquire. Now, I had some line work in the drawing we provided the engineer that gave a rough outline of those 2 parcels, but they weren't surveyed originally because they weren't part of the project. They were adjoiners. So unbeknownst to me, the engineer added those 2 parcels to the tentative map, which was submitted to the city, and never talked to me about it. So the map gets approved. I get told to start work on the final map, and at this point, nobody's told me that we added those 2 lots. So at some point in the process, I was told to add the 2 lots, and we got that done, and we added the 2 lots. But in the meantime, the city had realized that there was some existing private sewer easements that impacted those 2 parcels. And so they came to me about that and said, hey, you got to figure out what's going on with these easements. Are they still being used? Are they going to be abandoned as part of the project? You got to clean this up before we'll give you final approval on your parcel map. So I said, all right, let me double check. And so I looked, sure enough, when they added those two lots, the two holdout lots, there was some private sewer easements that were exchanged as part of the sewer system there, and they were still present. And so we had to stop the whole process and go in and figure out what we were going to do about these easements. Did they need to be abandoned by a separate instrument? Were they still being used? Were they no longer going to be used after the project was built? Could we just abandon them via the parcel map that we were doing? So I was talking to the client's attorney and the city's attorney, and we're trying to get all that figured out. That probably caused somewhere between a 2-week and 4-week delay in the project. So unnecessary delay. The other issue that came up on that project is the engineer had inadvertently put the engineer and the architect, the design team, had put the footing of one corner of the building inside a 5-foot public utility easement that ran along one of the streets. And so we had a real tough time there. We had to figure out, what do we do? The city caught it during review. Do we move the building, which is going to be really, really expensive at that point in the design process? Or do we try and talk the city into letting us pinch that utility easement at that point? Have a utility easement that was narrower than the standard width. Here's the point of the story. If the design team, the architect and the civil engineer, had kept me involved in the tentative map process, we could have avoided those problems. I would have found the sewer easements on the two new parcels, and I would have realized that we were putting a building in a PUE, proposed public utility easement. So why should civil engineers and architects not do their own tentative maps, even though they're allowed to by law? Here's the 3 reasons. If you don't know what you're doing, you can have a serious impact on the site design and the structures. And I just gave you an example of that. You want a surveyor involved so he can be thinking about how the configuration of the new lots, any existing easements, any new easements, and the existing parcel boundary, how those things are going to impact your site design. And that includes building setbacks. It also includes land title issues. I'll do a video in the future that talks about a land title issue we had on a project that had a huge impact on where we could put the buildings. So most civil engineers and architects are not going to catch those things. They're not going to realize they're an issue. So you need to have a surveyor involved. So the first reason is impact on site design and structures. The second is impact on value. So the way you configure lots, the way you configure your proposed easements, those all have and ultimately have an impact on the value of that project. And you want to have a land surveyor looking at those things. You cost a developer a couple lots on a project, that can be the difference between a parcel that pencils and doesn't pencil. One of the things as an example that I might look at as a land surveyor is, hey, can we do a lot line adjustment with a neighbor, pick up another half an acre and add a lot? Most civil engineers and architects aren't thinking about that stuff. So you need to have a land surveyor involved in the survey of the existing boundary, looking at setbacks, building setbacks, looking at proposed lot configurations, looking at proposed easement configurations, so that he can help preserve the value of the development. The third reason is impact on future value. So the quality in which easements are dedicated or conveyed, the way public right-of-way is taken, the monuments that are set to mark a development, all those things have an impact on the future value of a project. For example, if a project isn't properly monumented, then in the future you could have a real risk of encroachments. So you want to make sure that a land surveyor is involved in all aspects of the tentative map so that he can make sure that the future value of that land is preserved, that easements go where they're supposed to, they cover the physical improvements, that buildings stay out of the setback lines, that you're not going to have risk of encroachments in the future. So what parts of a tentative map should a land surveyor prepare? That's the other question we wanted to answer in this video. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown. The land surveyor should prepare the resolution of the parent parcel boundary. That has to be done at some level, even at the tentative map phase. Hopefully I'll do another video where I talk about phasing of tentative maps and how you can adjust costs there. But, as a general rule, you've got to do some kind of parent boundary resolution. The land surveyor needs to do that. You need to do mapping of existing easements. The land surveyor should do that. The land surveyor should also look at, are there improvements that are outside of the existing easements? Sometimes you can't even nail down an existing easement. It might be a blanket easement, or it might be a crappy utility easement. PG&E's famous for those in California. So the land surveyor should look at all those issues. He should look at other issues related to land title that might impact where you put high value improvements like buildings on a parcel. They should look at the proposed parcels How are you going to configure those proposed parcels? How many are there going to be? He should look at proposed easements. Where's the engineer going to put easements? Put improvements like utilities that are going to require easements. How do you want to configure those? What monuments are going to be set? When are they going to be set? Before or after construction? What type of monuments are going to be set? How are you going to make sure that those boundaries and easements can be retraced reliably in the future so you don't have problems with encroachments or other land title issues? And finally, how do you tie your surveys and your tentative map to control? A lot of times you need to tie that map to city or county control because you're trying to design improvements that tie into the sewer system or the storm system, or there's other issues. Maybe it's flood zone issues or airspace rights. You need to make sure you know exactly where that project is on the earth in relation to other projects. So the short summary of the video is design professionals don't prepare tentative maps without a land surveyor. It's a really bad idea. You don't want to do it. You're exposing yourselves to risk. I'll close with a quick story. I had an engineer, civil engineer from a large multi-state engineering company call here a couple weeks ago. He couldn't get his regular surveyor to execute a boundary survey fast enough. He needed a boundary survey, a land title survey, and a tentative parcel map. Make a long story short, he basically told me, hey, can you do the field work and I'll prepare the tentative parcel map and the final parcel map and you can just stamp and sign them? The answer is no. I can't do that. I am not going to work with a design team that fails to see the value I might bring to the tentative map process. So if you want me to be, especially if it's my seal and signature is going on that tentative map, I need to be involved, and I certainly wouldn't let a civil engineer or an architect prepare a final parcel map that my name would go on. They're not allowed to sign final parcel maps by law, and I need to be involved so I can catch the kind of issues that we talked about and protect my client. So I hope that video is educational for up-and-coming architects and civil engineers. I say this a lot, and I'll say it again. Build a good relationship with a land surveyor you can trust. You will not